When I first started my SMMA, I was a terrible salesperson. My sales skills were bottom of the barrel, and I had a calendar of booked calls just like this. Right, started in April. Things really picked up in May. My ads were getting a bunch of leads for $7 each. You can tell, like, you can't really see here because it's zoomed out. But there are upwards to days where I was taking 10 calls per day. I would even take calls on Saturdays, do follow-ups. What I started doing was I'd block out Fridays because I get so burnt out. What I was doing quite literally on some days was I would literally, I was getting these $7 leads. They're pretty good. This SMA wasn't so saturated, but I was taking 10 calls per day, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. If they don't show up on a call, I call them. But I was rigorously trying to close people, but I had no sales skills. So I would imagine jumping on 10 calls per day, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., 12 hours per day, not closing a single person. And I'm like, I have the sheer numbers here, right? It's a numbers game, right? I was like, oh, it's a numbers game. But I can close anyone, even after I was doing almost 100 calls per week. So I was like, okay, it's me, right? Like, I just suck, right? So what I did was, one of my friends was a door-to-door salesperson, and he trained me. And I was going from maybe like a 10% or less close rate, started closing 20-30%, upwards to 40-50% on calls that people sit in with me today on Zoom. So I've made a tremendous improvement of at least 20-30% in my close rate in my agency. And so this video I'm going to go over the exact process that I would do if I would start over from the beginning, and what I recommend without paying those sales training programs that are all over the internet. I'm not going to name any names, but you know what I mean, right? And so there are ways to improve on your sales without paying for those programs. I think a lot of those programs are very fruitful, right? If you probably worked at Jeremy Miner or Johnny Mao, probably will learn a lot genuinely, but not everyone has that kind of money to spend on those programs. I was one of those people. Has already spent like $7,000 on ads and got high level for a year, blah blah blah, as I didn't have any more money. But thankfully I had a friend who trained me. But you don't even need a person who trains you, right? You just need a desire to learn and get better. So, when I was starting, I was closing 10% of my calls, right? What I was doing really was I was getting all these objections, and what I was selling Facebook ads for HVAC contractors. So a lot of their objections were all the same. I've done this before, it didn't work. When you talk to my wife and you think about it, talk to my partner, is there a guarantee, is there a free trial, all those things. But what I was doing wrong was I was handling the objections at face value. I thought back then I was overcoming the objection. Oh, what do you need to think about? No, that's not overcoming the objection. It's just replying to them, right? You're not overcoming the objection. You're just handling the objection at face value, which we don't want to do. Every objection they give you is the same thing, right? It's a smokescreen. I didn't realize it back then. Right? When they say, "How do you think about it?" I'll be like, "So what do you and your wife need to think about?" No, it doesn't do anything for you. You just handle the objection at face value, and they're just going to continue to lie to your face. All right, all the objections are just lies and smokescreens. What I started to understand was the logic behind sales, like this, the flow on what to say, how to frame my questions that I'm asking them, but more so the psychology to make them take action. Because at the end of the day, they're getting on a call, and you got to think of yourself as a therapist, and you're just going to get them to take action. Right? They understand that you have their best interest in mind, and you're just going to say, "Hey, Dave, don't you think, we got to invest in ourselves in the business to make things work?" And then they're convinced they do it, right? A sales call is more so getting the prospect to take action than you trying to sell yourself in your business. No, it's not that, right? You're trying to get them to take action and believe in themselves, invest in themselves. And so I was trained by my friend who worked on door-to-door sales for 5+ years, and he's able to improve my close rate just by 20% because he just fixed my tonality, fixed my awkwardness, told me pretty much what to say and how to frame it. We did a bunch of practice day in and day out, and I was starting to close more from 10 to 20%, right? But You're not going to close more simply by having someone train you. If you do not have a calendar of calls like this, you're not going to get better. Unfortunately, you're not going to get better at sales without taking more sales calls. No matter how much you learn, how much content you shove into your brain from YouTube, you're not going to get better unless you take calls. If you don't have any calls to take, you have a couple things that you can do. You can either spend your own money on ads to get more calls, or you can go work for someone and they'll spend the money to give you calls to do, right? What I spent my own money on calls. Some people started out high ticket sales, and the company pays for the calls. So yeah, I can do that, right? But you're not going to get better without doing more calls, right? So I was taking calls, making notes on the objections that I was getting, watching training, rewatching calls to see how can I do things better. And day in and day out, I was implementing what I'm learning into these calls. But more so is doing what you see from the training videos is uncomfortable. It looks easy because these guys have been doing it for so long. They do it so flawlessly. But in actuality, when implementing the things that I'm learning, like it was hard. It was difficult. Because I was like, crap, like I didn't actually want to say this question, right? Like, when I close in comfort, right? Like before, the questions I was saying was comfortable to me. So the new questions that I had to say were uncomfortable, right? It was uncomfortable asking him, hey man, are you 100% satisfied? Hey man, are you sure? Right? Hey man, like, are you the one providing for, like, it was really uncomfortable to, force myself to prolong the call. So what I would do is like, if I can handle the objection or like I'm not feeling I'm gonna get anywhere, I'm just gonna sit in the call for as long as possible, prolong it as long as possible, and just handle objections as good as I can over and over and over and over and over again, even though we're going circles. But I would just prolong the call as long as possible, increase my sales stamina, right, and try to ask the right questions. And what actually happened is me forcing these calls to be awkward. I would literally take bathroom breaks in between calls, and the prospect would take bathroom breaks in between these calls, and we would prolong the call and I would try to close it. And what happened was I built this sales stamina so I can sit in on a 1 to 2 hour sales call if needed, right? But over time, you don't want to sit in good calls that long. You want to close them in 30, 45 minutes. And I started to close 30 to 50% of my sit-in calls. Overall improvement of pretty much 20%, right? But really, how do we do this? Is you can either become a closer, right? Take more calls, either work for someone to pay for the calls or pay for the ad spend to get the calls. But really, the reason that you have to do this, other than just have calls, you can say, oh, well, I'm just going to cold call, or I'm just going to send emails and get booked calls. Like, you're not going to get to the end result faster because you're simply not going to have enough volume of calls. And also, what you need to feel like is the fastest way for you to get better is when you're not getting better, you feel like you're burning money, right? So got another call, didn't close, burn $100 right there, right? So what I was seeing was I was burning money if I didn't close, and so I was like, crap, I need to get better. And so I was getting feedback and the training to improve, and as I saw my money burning to thin air, I started closing, right? Your money's on the line, right? But if you're sending cold emails, doing cold calls, like, you're wasting your time, right? But what do great closers do? What did I realize? What made me someone who's a complete beginner, bottom of the barrel closer to someone who is decent today is great closers do a couple things, right? They ask the right questions. Just ask the right questions and they have the right tonality, right? When you speak, you have tonality that creates empathy with your prospect and you maintain frame. Right, so throughout the call, you're not like, hey, stop talking about that. No, you maintain frame with your tonality and with the questions that you ask, so that they think about what you're asking them. It's very subtle. All these things are very subtle. We're never forcing things down their throat. We're never yelling at them. We're never saying, hey, stop talking about that. Because we're maintaining frame. Everything's very subtle. And then lastly, have good sales stamina. So good closers and salespeople they can stay on the call, continue talking with the prospect even when things are uncomfortable, and prolong it as long as needed, and close it. So, I don't swear off paying for sales trainings. If you feel like you need it and you have the money to afford to, do it. But if you don't, just like me, this is the exact framework that I would follow to become a better closer without paying for one of those trainings.